The tragic shooting in Tumbler Ridge brought Parliament Hill to a standstill this week as political leaders set aside everything and showing a deeply human side of themselves, offering comfort instead of politics.
It's obviously a very difficult day for the nation. This morning, parents, grandparents, sisters, brothers in Tumbler Ridge will wake up without someone they love. The nation mourns with you. Canada stands by you.
As a father, I can only imagine the phone call or visit that brought the news, the panic, the helplessness, the heartache that followed. No parent should ever have to fear that their child will not return home from school. No parent should ever bury their own child.
It has been the sort of week that no political leader can ever truly prepare for, but which they all have to respond to when it happens. And we're going to start there with our reporter roundtable this week. We've got Robert Fife, he's the Ottawa Bureau Chief for the Globe and Mail. Mia Rabson is the Deputy Parliamentary Bureau Chief at the Canadian Press. And Joël Denis Bellavance is the Parliamentary Bureau Chief for La Presse. Hard week for us to prepare for in terms of the normal course of coverage and conversation. But, you know, Bob, like, not a lot of politics on display, a lot of leadership on display, which is a good thing to see. The Prime Minister, the clip we played of him there, was sort of the first response we saw the day after here in Ottawa. He's the Prime Minister, but he's also a father, and you saw it in his eyes and saw it in his face with his first comments there.
You know, all the leaders in Parliament rose to the occasion. And in this particular case, you could see the Prime Minister was holding back from breaking down, frankly. And you could see that in the voice of Pierre Poilievre as well. When I listened to the leaders' speeches in the House of Commons, I was more riveted, even although they said they really were very articulate in what they had to say, and it touched me deeply, but I was riveted by members of Parliament, men and women who were crying. And they were wiping away their tears. And, you know, these were fathers and mothers who probably had children the same age or grandchildren the same age. And it just spoke to that moment to me. And I was sitting there trying to hold back tears myself when you watch other people crying. And look, there are no words to describe what happened here. And I just feel for the families who lost these beautiful young children, and for the families who have got children who are fighting for their lives, or who have now got to go through the deep personal turmoil of the shock of that moments of incredible violence. And I'm not being very articulate myself because it's so upsetting. No,
look, there's more poetry in what you're saying than I think you realize, Bob. We're hard on ourselves in these moments because, Mia, it is how do you respond to it? What is the right way to deal with it? And even earlier in the show, talking to Ian Hannah-Mansing, who's describing how he's approaching it there on the ground, right? One of the most recognizable television journalists in Canada. And he says, I just wait for people to come to me, right? Rather than, because, you know, if you show up there and you make it worse, you're doing it wrong. And the politicians, to their credit, have all realized we're not going to make it worse. We're going to do anything we can to make it better.
And I've seen some discussion online in the last sort of 24 hours about that approach in Canada and how the reaction to this from across the board. I mean, there's a few, obviously, parts of this that maybe the reaction is not what you'd want to see. But for the vast majority of Canadians right now, you're seeing leadership at every level. You're seeing leadership from the RCMP in the language they're using, in the sensitivity that they are giving to the situation. You're seeing it from politicians in the House of Commons across the country, the journalists that are covering this. It wasn't covered as a spectacle, as entertainment. It was very respectful. I think it also, a little bit goes to the shock of how this is a rare event in Canada. It is not something we hear about a lot because of what happens in the United States, but we often like to think that we don't really have to worry when we send our kids to school that they're in this kind of danger. So I think it's really touched a lot of Canadians from that perspective. Who in Canada, whether you're a student yourself, a parent, you've been to school, you've sent your kids to school. You know, it's one of the most common places. It's something everybody can relate to. And And what we saw, I think, in the House of Commons yesterday, you heard, I think, Pierre Poilievre say this is not a day for partisanship. You didn't see any kind of politicking from them.
No.
Yesterday, you still haven't seen it today. I think Canada, as awful as what happened is, I think Canadians should feel some comfort in the unity of the response and the kind of response that's happened.
Well, JD, I was struck, Yves-François Blanchet, the leader of the Bloc, he spoke English in the House of Commons. So the people of British Columbia and Tumbler Ridge who hadn't had the opportunity to learn French could hear his condolences. I don't think he's ever done that before. So even, that was a poignant moment, I thought.
Yes, and you're right in saying that Mr. Blanchet never speaks English in the House of Commons. It's against his belief, but he felt that he had to rise to the moment. And I would agree with Bob, what was very touching, not only the speeches from the Prime Minister, from Pierre Poilievre, from Don Davies, Yves-François Blanchet, or the Green Party leader, Madame May, but also seeing MPs reaching out for Kleenex to wipe their eyes. And
the pain on their faces was incredible.
You could tell that yesterday we faced a nation that was in a state of shock. And some MPs were elected a year ago. So I guess that event demonstrated that they lost their innocence, that this is real, that they, as legislators, they have a role to play in showing leadership to Canadians. And what I find reassuring is that we've seen many of those kinds of shootings, mass shootings in the United States, and the minute that the gun stops shooting, the blame games begins in the United States. We did not see that here, and so congratulations to the political class at every level for showing, rising to the moment that it was.
Well, increasingly, we're dealing with these, right? 6 years ago, Portapique. 10 years ago, last month, La Loche in Saskatchewan, right? We're not immune to it. The frequency is obviously much, much lower in these sorts of things, but, more and more it happens. And Bob, if there's one thing that strikes me as a positive out of this, and there's nothing positive about what happened. Let me make that very clear. But we spoke to the mayor of the county in Nova Scotia that holds Portapique and the response she saw from the RCMP. Now, look, when we find out these guns and what happened and where they came from, this whole thing could change. But the level of candor and alert and the response from a small rural detachment was a big improvement over what happened 6 years ago in Nova Scotia.
Yeah, listening to your interview earlier this evening with the Deputy Commissioner of the RCMP, who spoke that they only had 5 police officers. They were probably right out of police college.
Yep.
And they didn't hesitate. They went into that school and they tried to save as many lives as they could. And they didn't know what was in there, how many people were in there, whether they were going to get shot or not. They went in there. And as the Deputy Commissioner says, it speaks to the training that the RCMP had, that these young men and women went into that school. And then they had to deal with the injured. I mean, just think about this, horrific. Going in there, and these are 12-year-old kids who have been shot and bleeding and all of that sort of stuff, and they went in and they did their duty, and I mean, all of these people are heroes, and everybody in that community, frankly, is a hero.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was struck by something the Prime Minister said. In that there was no politics. I agree, no politicking. But there also wasn't a denial that there will need to be some tough conversations, right? To use the American example, you think, now's the time for thoughts and prayers, don't politicize this. He said words to the effect of, we will have to have some difficult conversations, we will have to answer some difficult questions because we owe it to people. And that follow through is where the true response to this by the political class at every level will really be judged.
And I mean, I don't know that I trust that we will never have politicking in this. I mean, we're dealing with some intense issues here.
And there are culture war issues happening
culture
online,
wars that are
on the
happening.
margins of things, right?
But even just the gun issue alone is an issue that we were dealing with before this incident happened. And so there is going to be politics that enter into this. There is no doubt in my mind that that's going to happen. But at least allowing that initial moment to happen, allowing people the time to grieve, to absorb. I mean, I think it takes a bit of time even just to understand what happened and to absorb it and allow yourself to process it, whether you were from there or from anywhere in Canada. So I think giving people that time is really important. There's no doubt after an event like this, because it shouldn't have happened, and there clearly were some things that happened that you know, something went wrong when something like this happened, and we have a lot of questions to answer. I would hope that that investigation is done and responded to and reported on with the same respect for the families and the tragedy
Absolutely,
that occurred.
yeah.
Do I think that will happen? I hope so. I don't know.
Well, yeah, and JD, like, it could get, and I'm not trying to sensationalize this here, because I did ask the Deputy Commissioner about this, and it is an unanswered question for this, about the guns and where they came from, and the revelation, we know about this because the RCMP told us that they had visited that house taking guns, and under the red flag laws, they were legally petitioned to be returned. Now, I don't know if they went back to that house, we don't know if they were the guns involved with this, but when we do get the facts of that matter, it could change a lot of assumptions and questions about how this whole thing was handled. So I just mention that to signal that this is a unresolved question and something that government may have to confront down the road.
And this is the kind of conversation that will happen afterwards, after the grief period is, you know, if it's possible to finish. And at the end of the day, our legislators will have to deal with that issue. What do we do with houses, but residents in a house where they have some mental problems, but there's also guns around it? Do we need to have a better control over that? So that's the kind of question that the political leadership will have to answer, but not today. And I think as another show of unity between different political parties, the Prime Minister taking the leaders of the other parties tomorrow to attend that vigil, I find it very extraordinary, and I commend the leadership of the Prime Minister on that one.
Yeah, there's been no pettiness in this moment.
Look, I mean, we do have strong gun laws in this country. Compare what happened. We'll find out what happens in terms of how these guns were returned, and maybe we need to strengthen that. But if you compare to what happened in the United States, where when there are these kind of mass shootings, the view is, let's arm teachers, let's arm students. This is not the Canadian approach. We're a very civil society, and we've put in some pretty significant gun laws, and maybe we have to tighten them up some more. The one thing that's troubling me that's come out today is people on the religious right, and people like Stockwell Day, who's a former cabinet minister, trying to politicize it in the sense that this is a result of the shooter being trans. Look, this young person, had mental health problems that had nothing to do with whether he was trans. And and when you try to politicize that by blaming it on trans people, when mass murders happen all the time, and they usually are people who are very deeply disturbed, and it's not because they're trans. And we have, as a society, we have to not allow ourselves to go down that road.
And
If I may say quickly on this one, I think it's totally irresponsible on the part of the former cabinet minister to talk that way. He knows the process. There will be an investigation that will determine what are the causes and the whole event surrounding this. So for Mr. Stockwell to express such an opinion, I think is very irresponsible.
I think it's worth noting, though, that you haven't seen that kind of culture war coming in from the leaders that are in office right now. You haven't seen it coming from, I haven't seen that kind of discussion coming from any of the sitting MPs. I mean, I might be wrong about that, but I haven't seen it, I haven't heard about it. And I think keeping that conversation out of that realm also sets the tone for the rest of the country and gives a tone for how other people can talk about it and discuss it. There is no doubt that we are going to have a conversation about mental health and mental health treatment in this country as a result of this incident. We know that mental health issues were at play, but we do not know what the motivation was, why this person, why she went to the school, why she did what she did. There are multiple different reasons that this could have happened. We don't know, and it is incredibly irresponsible to suggest that any one factor, regardless of what you feel like, could have caused this.
No, look, it's a key point. Jesse Van Rootselaar, the shooter in this case, transitioned 6 years ago. She, now to use the proper pronoun, and I know in a fluid situation like this, when there are dead children, it's hard to keep it all straight. But there's a lot of questions still to be answered about all of this, right? About the motivation, about these things, and it's not like whether they're trans, cisgendered, gay, straight, man, woman, makes this any less of a tragedy and any less evil or any more evil because of that, right? And this is, we still have a lot of things we don't know the answers to just yet.